The $500 was sitting in the dark for a long time before Marcus found it. He did not know that when he pulled the book from the sale bin. He did not know it when he carried it home in a plastic bag through the November cold, his coat too thin for the weather, his checking account at $11.42. He was 19 years old, and tired in a way that felt older than that, and all he was trying to do was find something to read over the holiday weekend when the library closed early and the dining hall cut its hours and the dormitory got very quiet. He paid $2 for the book. He thought that was all it would cost him. He had no idea what he was about to find inside it, and even less idea whose life it was about to pull him into. Marcus had been at Caldwell University for 14 months. He was on a partial scholarship that covered tuition and left everything else to chance. Chance for him meant a work-study job in the campus mailroom from 6 to 10 every morning, a shift at a sandwich counter 3 evenings a week, and a budget so tight it had no give in it at all. He tracked every dollar in a small notebook he kept in his jacket pocket. The notebook had a column for food, a column for bus fare, a column for things like laundry and printer credits, and the occasional tube of toothpaste. There was no column for anything that was not strictly necessary, because there was nothing left over to put in it. The mailroom was in the basement of the administration building, a long, low-ceilinged room that smelled of paper dust and tape, and the floor cleaner the custodial staff used at night. Marcus sorted packages from 6 in the morning until 10, alone for the first hour before a second work-study student arrived, standing under fluorescent lights that had the quality of permanent early morning. He wore the same grey hoodie most days because the room was cold, and because he had 2 hoodies, and one of them had a broken zipper. He was good at the work, which required no particular skill beyond attention, and the willingness to stay on your feet for 4 hours without complaint. His supervisor, a heavy-set man named Roy, who had worked the mailroom for 11 years, and who ate the same ham sandwich at 8:15, every morning from the same brown bag, told him in September that he was the most reliable student worker he'd had in 3 years. Marcus thanked him. Roy said it wasn't really a compliment, just a fact. Marcus told him it sounded like one anyway. Roy almost smiled. The sandwich counter where he worked 3 evenings was at the edge of campus, a small place that served the university neighborhood, and stayed open late enough to catch the study crowd. He made $7.50 an hour, plus whatever tips the tip jar collected at the end of the night, divided among however many people were working. On a busy Tuesday that might be $8 or $10, on a slow Monday it might be $2. He ate whatever the counter was planning to discard at closing, a rolled end of bread, the last of the soup, a half portion of something the cook had made too much of. He did not feel bad about this. He felt practical about it, which was not the same thing but was adjacent to it. He had learned in his first semester that there was a particular kind of pride that would cost you more than it protected, and he had chosen not to carry it. His mother, Darlene, worked the front desk at a physical therapy clinic in their hometown 3 hours south. She sent him $40 on the first of every month when she could, and called him every Sunday evening without fail. She had told him when he left for school that she was proud of him, and she said it again every Sunday, and he believed her. But pride did not fill the gap between what the scholarship covered and what a semester actually cost. The gap, in his first year, had been closed by a one-time emergency grant from the financial aid office. By selling his graphing calculator to a junior who needed one and had money, and by 3 months of lunches skipped or stretched across whatever the dining hall had that could be eaten quickly, without a full meal swipe. He had managed, he was managing still. Managing was the work, alongside the coursework, alongside the mailroom and the counter and the notebook with its columns. He was 19 years old and tired in a way that felt older than that, but he was still there, which was the thing that mattered. The book sale was in the basement of the student union, run by the Campus Literary Society as a fundraiser. Tables of donated volumes lined the walls, $1 each or 3 for $2, the rule chalked on a small board near the entrance. Marcus went down there on a Wednesday afternoon in the second week of November because he had 90 minutes between his mailroom shift and his afternoon class, and it was warm inside, and he was hungry, and he did not want to sit somewhere and think about being hungry. He ran his fingers along the spines on the far table without any particular intent. A few paperback novels, some old textbooks with the covers bent back, a hardcover collection of essays he picked up and set back down. Then at the end of the row, pushed flat on its side with a dozen others stacked on top of it, a thick cloth-bound book with no dust jacket. Its spine faded from what might once have been dark green to a soft greys-green that reminded him of river water. He pulled it out. It was a collection of short stories, the kind of volume a literature department might have assigned 20 years ago, and since replaced. The author's name meant nothing to him. He turned it over, read the few lines on the back, decided it would do. He paid the $2 and put it in his bag and walked to class. He did not open it until that Friday night. He was sitting on his bed with his shoes off. His roommate gone home for the weekend. The dormitory corridor quiet in the particular way it got when most people had somewhere to go. And the people who stayed behind were quiet about staying. The room was a double with a cinder block wall painted the colour of old cream. His side of the room had a small desk, a bookshelf made from 2 boards and a pair of concrete blocks he had found in the alley behind the building, and a photograph of his mother on the corkboard above the desk, taken at his high school graduation, her hand on his shoulder and her chin slightly lifted. His roommate, a kid from the suburbs named Elliot, who was studying pre-law and had a coffee maker that used pods that cost 90 cents each, had gone home to a house 3 hours east where his parents would cook for him and he would sleep in his old room until Sunday. Marcus was aware of this without bitterness. It was just a fact of the landscape. The way the buildings and the hills and the endowments were facts of the landscape. He was here. Elliot was there. Both of those things were true simultaneously. He opened the book to the first story and read 3 pages before he felt something odd under his palm. He thought at first it was a folded insert, the kind of publisher's note that sometimes slipped in from an old mailing. He pulled it out without looking at it and set it on the bed beside him and kept reading. A minute passed. He reached the end of the page and turned it, and then stopped and looked at what he had set aside. It was money. Not a single bill, but a folded envelope unsealed, the flap just tucked in. He opened it slowly. Inside were 5 $100 bills, crisp and flat, tucked in together as though someone had placed them there with care rather than haste. He counted them twice, then a third time. $500 in an old book, in a sale bin in the basement of a student union building, purchased for $2 on a Wednesday afternoon. He sat with it for a long moment. He knew what $500 would mean to him. It was 6 weeks of groceries. It was the winter coat he had been putting off since October, the one he had priced at a discount store on the edge of campus and set back on the rack because $89 was not in the notebook's columns. It was the gap in his account that made every week feel like threading a needle, the margin between enough and not quite. He turned the envelope over in his hands. There was nothing written on it. No name, no address, no note. Just 5 crisp bills in a plain white envelope tucked between pages 43 and 44 of a cloth-bound book of short stories that had sat in a sale bin for who knew how long before he bought it for $2. He could have kept it. He sat there and looked at it squarely and admitted to himself that he could have. No one would ever know. The book had cost $2. The money had no name on it. The professor was dead, according to Priya, and the estate had donated the books without inventory. And there was no system in the world designed to track $500 tucked into a donated volume at a campus sale. He could have put it in his account that night and bought the coat on Saturday and covered the gap, and felt the relief of having solid ground under his feet for the first time in months. He thought about his mother's $40 arriving on the first of every month and what it cost her to send it. He thought about what Roy had said in the mail room, that he was reliable, that reliability was a fact and not a compliment, and he thought about how many things in his life he had done well and quietly, and without asking whether they would be noticed, because that was simply who he was. He could keep it, and he would know he had kept it. That was the small, unbending truth that sat in his chest while he looked at the envelope. Not that anyone else would judge him, only that he would know. He put the money back in the envelope and set it on his desk and did not sleep well that night. He told himself in the morning that he would try to find who left it there. He gave himself 2 weeks. The next day he went back to the basement of the student union and found the woman who ran the literary society table, a junior named Priya who was packing up leftover volumes into cardboard boxes. He explained what he had found and watched her face go still with surprise. She said the books had all been donated, that they kept a rough log of donors, that she would look into where that particular volume had come from. She took his number. She said she would call him. She called him 3 days later. The book, she said, had come in with a larger donation from the estate of a retired professor, a man named Walter Osey, who taught comparative literature at Caldwell for 26 years before his death the previous spring. The donation had been handled by the professor's daughter, whose name Priya had but whose contact information she did not feel comfortable sharing. She gave Marcus the professor's name and said that was really all she could do. He thanked her and hung up and sat for a minute with the name written in his notebook, Walter Osey. He wrote it below the columns for food and bus fare and laundry. He went to the university library the following afternoon and asked the reference desk how to find the obituary for a recently deceased faculty member. The librarian, a quiet man named Gerald, who seemed pleased to have a specific task, pulled up the university archive and found the memorial notice published in the campus newsletter the previous June. Marcus read it standing at the terminal. The professor had joined the faculty in 1991. He had taught courses in 20th century African literature, comparative narrative theory, and the short story as a form. He had been born in Accra, Ghana, and had come to the United States for graduate school and stayed. He was survived by his daughter, Abina, and a sister who lived in London. He had been 63 years old. There was a photograph beside the notice. A man with close-cropped grey hair, glasses, a slight smile, standing in front of a wall of books in what Marcus recognised as the seminar room on the 4th floor of the Humanities Building. He had passed that room 100 times. He had never known the man who stood in it. Gerald asked if he needed anything else. Marcus said no and thanked him. He stood there at the terminal for another minute after Gerald walked away, looking at the photograph of the man with the quiet smile and the wall of books behind him. He tried to imagine what kind of person put $500 in a donated book. Not the act itself, which he could describe, but the character behind it. A man who had enough money to give it away in that quantity, who had put it in a book going to a student sale table, who had not attached a note or a condition or a name. A man who had taught the short story as a form for 26 years, and presumably understood something about the way a small contained thing could carry enormous weight. He thought about the money again that night, lying in the dark with the envelope still on his desk. He thought about who might have put it there, and why, and whether it was meant to be found at all. $500 placed in a book and donated to a sale table was not an accident. It did not feel like carelessness. It felt like a decision made with full awareness that the decision could not be undone or controlled once the book left his hands. It felt like something given and released. He just did not know whose hand had released it, or what they intended when they did. Finding Abina Osey took him 4 more days. He started with the university directory, which listed her as a visiting researcher in the Department of African and African American Studies, an affiliation that had apparently continued for a semester after her father's death. The directory was a year out of date. Her office extension no longer active when he called it. He sent an email to the general addresses for the department, explaining that he was a student who had purchased a book from the Literary Society sale and found something inside it that he believed belonged to the family of Professor Osey, and that he would appreciate any help in reaching the professor's daughter. He kept the email short and said nothing about the amount. He gave his name and his phone number and his dormitory address and sent it. He waited. 2 days passed without a reply. He was not in the habit of giving up on things. Partly because he had grown up in a house where you did not give up on things, and partly because the money sat on his desk every day in its plain envelope and he could not make himself spend it. It did not feel like his. It felt like something left in trust, even if no one had asked him to hold it. If you have ever found something that did not belong to you, something that would have made your own life easier to simply keep, you know what those 2 weeks felt like for Marcus. Drop a comment below and tell me if you would have done the same. On the 6th day after he sent the email, his phone rang with a number he did not recognize, a local area code. He answered it between his mailroom shift and his first class, standing in the cold outside the student union, with his breath making small clouds in the air. He had a thermos of coffee from the break room that had gone tepid. He had his notebook in his jacket pocket. He had no particular reason to expect this call to be what it turned out to be. The woman on the other end of the line said her name was Abina. Her voice was measured and precise, with a slight lift at the end of certain words that he would later learn was a remnant of the years she had spent in London for her own graduate work. She said she had received his message, forwarded to her by a colleague in the department. She asked him what he had found. He told her. He said $500 in a plain envelope, tucked inside a cloth-bound collection of short stories by a writer he had not heard of, purchased from the Literary Society sale for $2. He said he had it for almost a week, and he had not spent any of it, because he did not think it was his to spend. There was a pause on the line that lasted long enough for him to wonder if the connection had dropped. Then Abina said, quietly, "My father put that there." He was still standing in the cold. He didn't say anything. She said her father had a habit, something he had done for years, that she had known about for a long time without knowing its full shape until after he was gone. He kept money tucked in books he donated. Not always. Not every book. Often enough that she had found evidence of it in the records he left behind, small notes in a journal he had kept, entries that said things like 300 in the Achibi, give to the library sale, or 200 in the Baldwin Student Union box. He had done it since at least 1998. He believed, she said, that books found the people who needed them. He had found a book himself as a young man, a paperback with a $20 bill tucked inside the cover, at a moment when he had 20 cents in his pocket and had not eaten that day. He did not know who left it. He could not pay it back. So he paid it forward for 25 years in every donated book he could, in amounts that sometimes took her breath away when she read the entries. Marcus was quiet for a moment. The cold was biting at his ears, but he did not move. He was aware of his thermos in one hand, and his phone in the other, and the particular stillness of standing on a path in November, with your feet going numb while someone tells you something that rearranges your understanding of how long a small act can travel. He said, "I didn't know." She said, "He didn't want you to." He asked if she wanted the money returned. He meant it sincerely, the way he asked it. The envelope had been on his desk for 6 days, and he had not touched the bills inside. It was not that he thought returning them would be easy or painless. It was that they had not felt like his to spend, and that feeling had not changed in 6 days. And he had learned by then to trust that feeling when it stayed consistent. There was another pause, shorter this time. "Did you need it?" she asked. Not cruelly, and not with pity either. She asked it the way her father might have, he thought later, like a person who understood that a question could carry respect inside it, that you could acknowledge someone's need without diminishing them by noticing it. He said yes. He said he was on partial scholarship and working 2 jobs, and that $500 was a significant amount of money to him. He did not dress this up or apologize for it. He said it plainly, the way she had asked plainly. She said, "Then my father found the right person. Please keep it." That was always the point. He thanked her. He did not know what else to say, and he did not try to fill the space with anything extra. She said she was glad he had called. She said she had not known how many books her father had given away this way until she went through his journals. And she suspected there were people all over who had found his money and never traced it and never known whose hand had placed it there. She said finding out about one of them and learning that the money had gone to someone who needed it and had the character to try to return it meant more to her than she could say. They talked for 23 minutes, there in the cold, outside the student union. She asked him what he was studying. He said, economics and public policy, that he wanted to work in municipal finance one day, that he was the first in his family to finish a 4-year degree, and that every week felt like a negotiation between staying enrolled and staying fed. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said her father would have liked him. She said it plainly, without flourish, and it landed in him the way plain things do when they are true. Before they ended the call, she asked if she could tell him one more thing about her father. He said yes. She said he had grown up without much. His family in Accra had worked hard, but there had never been enough. And the years of his education had been a long negotiation with scarcity that he never quite forgot, not even after the salary and the tenure and the corner office in the Humanities building. He remembered what it felt like to open a book and find something unexpected inside it. He believed that a person who could not receive it gracefully had not yet understood that kindness moved in a circle, and that the circle needed people willing to accept it when it came their way. Marcus wrote that down later, in the small notebook in his jacket pocket, below the columns for food and bus fare and laundry. He did not write the exact words because he could not remember them precisely. He wrote the shape of it, the idea that the circle needed people willing to close it. He spent $200 of it on a winter coat that week, a good one, thick enough to last several seasons. He found it at the same discount store where he had priced one in October and set it back on the rack. It was dark green, almost the colour of the book's faded spine, though he did not notice that until later. He paid for it at the counter with 2 of the $100 bills and stood outside the store for a moment with the bag before he walked back. Campus, feeling the cold Swiss face and thinking that this was what a reasonable purchase felt like, the kind of purchase other people made, without the week of calculation that usually preceded every dollar he spent. He had earned this, not the money, exactly, not in the literal sense. He had earned the right to spend it without shame, which was its own kind of thing. He put $150 into his account against the gap. The number in the column went from $11.42 to somewhere that felt like enough, which was not a number so much as a condition. The remaining $150 he held for a few days, sitting with a question he had not yet fully formed. Then, on a Saturday morning before his counter shift, he went back to the sale table in the student union basement and bought 14 used books from the remaining stock at $3 each. Not for himself. He paid Priya for them and asked if she could send him the list of groups that received the sale proceeds. She gave him a confused look and said she would. He said thank you and took the books home in 2 plastic bags and spent one evening tucking folded bills into 11 of them, amounts ranging from $10 to $25 depending on what he had left, and returned them to the sale table the following morning before his mailroom shift, with a note that said to add them back to the general stock. He did not tell anyone. He did not tell his mother until months later, and when he did, she was quiet for a long time on the Sunday call before she said, "That sounds like you." He kept one of the 3 books he had not put money in, a worn paperback with a cover image he liked, and he read it over the following month in the thin afternoon hours between his shifts. He thought about the professor while he read it. He thought about a young man in Accra who had come up with nothing and who had held onto the memory of a $20 bill found in a paperback for the next 40 years, and who had spent those 40 years putting money in books because he could not let the circle stay open. He thought about all the people who had never known the name of the man who left it. He thought about the ones who needed it and kept it, and the ones who might have tried, like him, to trace it back. He thought about how the professor had never required any of them to do anything except receive it. The coat was dark green, close to the colour of the book's faded spine, though Marcus did not notice that at first. He wore it through the rest of November and all of December, through the long weeks of finals and the quiet dormitory, and the Sunday calls home, and when winter deepened and the cold came in hard oft, the lake he was warm in a way that felt like more than the coat itself. He did not have a word for what it felt like exactly. He wrote in his notebook that it felt like being held up by something you could not see, by a hand that had reached across a distance it would never be able to measure. He met Abina in person in the spring, at a small memorial gathering the humanities department organized in her father's honor in the seminar room on the 4th floor, the room with the wall of books and the photograph he had seen in the obituary. The gathering was on a Thursday evening, announced on the department's bulletin board and in a brief email to current and former students. Marcus had not been a student of his. He had never taken a literature course. He went because he could not think of a reason not to, because the man had reached through 25 years of quietly tucked envelopes and touched his life in a way he could not pretend was nothing. The room held maybe 30 people. Some were faculty with the particular contained quality of academics at institutional events, nodding and holding plastic cups. Some were graduate students who had known the professor. A few were undergraduates who had taken his courses and stood near the food table looking young and a little uncertain about where to put their hands. The wall of books behind the table ran floor to ceiling on 2 sides and smelled faintly of old paper and dry wood, the smell of rooms where someone has spent decades thinking inside them. On the low table at the front of the room there was a framed photograph, the same one from the obituary, the slight smile and the glasses and the close-cropped grey hair, and beside it a small spray of yellowsers that someone had brought. Abina was tall, with her father's eyes and something precise in the way she listened. She was speaking with a faculty member when Marcus arrived, and she caught his eye after a few minutes and crossed the room to him. She had a direct way of meeting a handshake that he associated with people who had spent years at tables where being taken seriously was not given freely. He told her his name. She said she recognized it from the email, that she had been glad to receive it. He said he was glad she had called back. She had kept his journals, she told him quietly near the end of the evening. All of them, going back to the late 1990s, filled with his small handwritten entries about books and amounts and destinations. Some of the destinations were libraries. Some were thrift stores. Some were campus sale tables at 3 different universities where he had worked or lectured over his career. She had counted, roughly, what the journals recorded, and the number was not small. She said she had kept his habit, not with money and books, but in her own way, in the work she did, in the way she tried to see the students in the rooms her father had once taught in. She said her father believed that dignity was the one thing a person could give without running out of it, and that every person he slipped a few $100s to in a donated book had taught him something he tried to apply the next time. Marcus shook her hand before he left. He thanked her again, though neither of them needed the word at that point. He walked out of the humanities building and across the dark quad to the dormitory and sat at his desk for a while without turning on the overhead light. The notebook was on the corner of the desk. The green coat was on the hook behind the door. He could still hear the faint sound of the reception winding down across the campus, voices and laughter carrying in the cold air through the window glass. He thought about his mother, who had been sending him $40 on the first of every month when she could, who had told him he was worth it every Sunday for 14 months, who had never once made him feel that the sacrifice was something she needed recognized. He picked up his phone and called her, even though it was a Thursday and not a Sunday, even though it was almost 10 at night, and she was likely already in bed with the television on low, the way she always did. She answered on the second ring. She said his name the way she always said it, with a small upturn at the end that had been there his whole life. He said he just wanted to talk for a minute. She said okay. She said she had a few minutes. She did not ask why he was calling on a Thursday, because she was his mother and she did not need to ask. He told her about the coat. He told her it was warm. She said good. She had been worrying about that coat situation since October. He laughed a little. She laughed a little. He did not tell her everything else that night. Not the full story of the book, and the money and the phone call, and the spring gathering, and the wall of books in the seminar room. He told her that later slowly, in pieces across several Sunday calls, the way long things are best told. What she said, when he finally told her all of it, was this: "Your grandmother used to say that you can always tell a person has character by what they do with something they didn't have to give back." He wrote that down too in the small notebook, below everything else. 14 months later, in the spring of his junior year, Marcus was awarded a fellowship in the economics department, funded by a bequest from a retired faculty member's estate. The fellowship was small, $3,000 spread over 2 semesters, enough to close the gap between his scholarship and the real cost of staying enrolled. He did not know at first where the money had come from. He found out in the fall when he asked the department administrator about the fellowship's history. She told him it had been established the previous year by the family of a retired literature professor, whose name he recognized when she said it, who had left a portion of his estate to support students who demonstrated financial need and academic integrity. The administrator said there had been 4 recipients so far across 2 departments, that the selection was based on faculty recommendation and financial aid records, and that the professor's daughter had asked that the recipients be told only that the fellowship came from a faculty bequest, nothing more. Marcus sat with that for a long time. He did not know if the fellowship had anything to do with him specifically, whether Abina had seen his name come up in the selection and kept quiet, or whether he had simply been found again, the way the book had found him, through a long and patient circle he could not fully see. He thought about the $500 and the coat and the 14 books he had. Returned to the sale table and the money tucked into 11 of them, small amounts that had probably been spent by now by people he would never meet. He thought about the $20 a young man in Accra had found in a paperback decades ago, and how that had grown, over 40 years and hundreds of donated books, into a fellowship that bore no name and asked for nothing in return. He thought about his mother's voice on Sunday evenings, steady and warm, and his grandmother's words about character and what you do with something you didn't have to give back. He wore the green coat all through that winter and the next. It lasted him the rest of his time at Caldwell. When he graduated in May of his senior year, Darlene drove 3 hours north to watch him walk across the stage. She had taken a personal day from the clinic and worn her good dress and stood near the back of the auditorium with his aunt and cousin because the seats in the reserved section had already filled. He did not know she was there until afterward, when he found her on the lawn outside the auditorium, standing in the morning light with her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes bright. He was still carrying his diploma sleeve. She put both arms around him and held on for a moment without saying anything, and he held on back. They went to a diner near campus that afternoon, the 4 of them. It was not a fancy place, just a neighborhood spot with good coffee and a laminated menu, and red vinyl booths worn smooth from years of use. His mother ordered the same thing she always ordered at diners, scrambled eggs and toast, and she cut the toast into triangles the way she had since he was small. He watched her do it and felt something settle in him that had been unsettled for 4 years. A small knot of worry and effort and wondering if he was going to make it that finally went loose. He had a job lined up in the city, entry-level work in the budget office of a municipal agency, modest pay and benefits and the kind of slow, grinding work that suited him. He had applied for graduate school in public policy for the following year. He had the green coat folded in a bag in the back seat of his mother's car, too warm for May but going home with him regardless, because some things you don't leave behind. He went back to the humanities building the week before graduation. He walked up to the 4th floor and stood in the doorway of the seminar room for a minute, looking at the wall of books and the empty table where a photograph of the professor had once stood during the memorial gathering. The room was empty in the late afternoon, the chairs pushed in, the low sunlight coming through the windows at a long angle and catching the spines of the books on the wall and making them glow a little. He thought about the man who had stood in this room for 26 years, who had put his own remembered hardship into hundreds of donated books over 4 decades, who had never required acknowledgement or gratitude or knowledge of whether the money was found at all, who had just kept doing it because the circle needed closing. He stayed there for a few minutes and then walked out and down the stairs and into the afternoon. Somewhere in this city right now, there are books on sale tables with money tucked inside them, left by people you will never know, waiting for someone to need them. Some of those people will keep the money and never wonder about it. Some of them will wonder but stop there. And some of them, a few, will do what Marcus did, will spend 2 weeks and a notebook and a dozen phone calls trying to trace it back, and will learn something about a man they never met that changes how they move through the world. If you have ever been the person who tried to give something back, even when no one required it, tell me about it below. And if this story moved you, there is another one waiting for you, about someone else who did the quiet right thing when it would have been so much easier not to. It was the right thing. It always had been. That small, clear fact was sitting in the dark in an old book, waiting for a 19-year-old with $11.42 in his account to come along and find it. The coat hangs on a hook in his apartment now, in the city, still green, still warm enough for the coldest nights. He has not put it away.